Chapter 15. Union is Strength. You must have heard about the story of the rabbit and the tortoise. You also know the proverbs, slow and steady wins the race, and haste makes waste. Having lost the race, the rabbits in union approached the king and pleaded with him to conduct the race again, as they felt that the stigma attached to them would live forever. The king agreed, and in the next race, the rabbits ran so fast that in seconds they reached the finishing line and won the race. Now the tortoises were upset because their name was getting tarnished. They approached the king, who reluctantly agreed to hold the race on condition that they would select the path. Accordingly, the race was held. The rabbits ran so fast that in no time they reached halfway. Alas, there was a river across their path, and they did not know how to swim. Meanwhile, the tortoise crept in and looked at the flowing river. Grinning like Cheshire cats, they swam across and reached their destination.
"Not fair! Not fair!" cried the rabbits. "How could the king choose such a path? He's fully aware of the fact that we rabbits can run like the wind, but we cannot swim. Down with the king!"
They wrote slogans on posters and marched up the street to the palace in a long procession, waving their fists in the air. The traffic slowed to a halt. Car horns, bus horns, scooter horns were honking. Pedestrians could not cross the street. Tempers were lost. Fistfights took place. And in general, there was chaos. When the king was told that the rabbits had come in a procession to demand justice and were standing outside the palace gates, he sighed.
"This is getting to be a bit too much,"
he thought to himself. He was all set to attend a jazz fest that evening, and now to be disturbed like that?
Did no one realize how hard a king had to work to be on duty 24/7, and all for a silly race? Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown.
The king muttered to himself as he got up from bed. He stuffed the golden crown over his blonde curls and strode to the big hall. He was in a royal rage.
"Call them in."
He ordered his ministers seated on one side of the hall. The rabbits marched in and demanded, with all respect of course, yet another race.
I will have to think of a solution,"
the king said, buying time.
"I have heard of try and try again. But I cannot go on allowing one race after another. Come back." "Your Majesty,"
came a voice from where the ministers were seated.
"Yes, who is that? Please come forward and speak."
The king barked.
"It is I, Birbal, Your Highness. May I have your royal ear?"
The king leaned forward as the wise and witty minister whispered into his ears. After a while, the minister stepped back and there was a smile on the royal face. He turned to the rabbits and said,
"You have our royal permission for a final race. However, you will sign a royal bond. According to the bond, you are to run the race on the same track as you did yesterday. If you lose the race like you did yesterday, I shall be having rabbit stew for dinner tomorrow night. Lastly, if I ever find you disturbing the peace of the land, you will be hanged by your ears."
The Rabbit Union realized it had landed itself in a stew. It was a choice between the devil and the deep blue sea. It was as clear as crystal. But then, as the old proverb goes, never say die. A solution had to be found, It was now a question of sink or swim. A rabbit union meeting was called for. The president stood up and gave a grand speech, ending it by saying,
"Friends, think of a way out, won't you? Where there is a will, there's a way."
The end of the final race arrived. The race began. The rabbits and the tortoises took off. Suddenly, the tortoises climbed and sat on the backs of the rabbits. When they reached the river bank, the tortoise climbed down and the rabbit sat on their back. They crossed the river together with ease. Once again, the tortoises sat on the back of the rabbits. Together, they reached the finishing line and all won the race.